Welcome to the Vibrant Life Show. This show is all about exploring the purposes God has placed on our lives and the passions He's placed in our hearts to reach the community He has placed us in for such a time as this. Whether we're hearing stories of those living out their purpose, helping you discover your gifts and passions, asking hard questions, or leaning into cultural moments, the goal of this show is to remind us that the life we're created to live is an adventurous one, an authentic one, a meaningful one. We are invited to live the vibrant life. Well, hi everyone. I am your host, Gentry, and welcome to the Vibrant Life Show. I am so glad you are joining us today as we dive in to a topic about our passions. How do we find them? How does God work through our lives and change? Even if we don't know exactly what they are, how can we discover it? And what might be keeping us from living those things out? And to talk about that with me today is Matt Swifty Perry. Hi, friend.
What's up? I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so stoked that you're here with me today. So Matt we go back a few years, but Matt is a pastor here in Chandler, a high school pastor at Cornerstone Church. And he's preached around the world. He's worked with world-class leaders. He is on the John Maxwell team and holds a coaching license from the network. He is also an amazing content creator. If you follow along with him, he has his own podcast called LeaderSwift, and it is pretty awesome. Those 15-minute nuggets on your way to work, just speaking with leaders from all types of areas. It's just honestly pretty awesome to see all that God has done in your life over the years that we have randomly known each other, and we'll get into that. But also, Matt has an unconventional method of sharing faith that takes a fresh look at the way Jesus would call individuals to live out their lives every day. And that's what our hope is here on the show, is to help people find that and to live out the vibrant life. And so, Matt, when I was thinking of people to have on, you were one of those people. Not only, obviously, you're here in Phoenix with me, but I have seen you do this. And do you remember how we met?
Yeah, we met at Hillsong Conference in LA 2017, I believe, in line for Starbucks. That took like 2 hours.
2 hours. We're not kidding. That line went so long. And both of us almost didn't do it.
Yeah.
But you're at a Christian conference and you have to have coffee.
Yes.
I think that's a requirement.
Yeah, it was Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles. And yeah, you were with your team from your church, and I was just there hanging out, and it was an amazing time.
Yeah, and we just had these awesome, deep conversations, and it amazes me consistently how when we're walking out and saying yes to what God has in front of us, how He brings people along our paths and then somehow works together, just our lives and our network, or even being here today. It blows my mind, the creativity of God and how He sees that. But I would love it if people got to know you, Matt, and just your story, how you've gotten to where you are today, and just how God's moved and gotten you to LeaderSwift, Matt Perry, Swifty, as we like to call you.
Yeah. I'll give you the highlights because it's a long story, but we'll make it short. I was adopted when I was 3 months old, supposed to be in an Indian family, a Muslim family, adopted into a Christian family outside of LA. And so grew up in the church. I just remember my first moments in the church. I would be hungry during church, and I wanted this thing called communion. Didn't understand it, but juice and crackers in church, come on. And then I was so competitive. There was this thing called baptism. I just thought it was a pool party at church. And so everybody was getting baptized, and I wanted to be the first one out of my friends to get baptized. So I was like, pick me. I want to get baptized. This is awesome. Get to wear your swim trunks to church. And just grew up in church. My parents were super involved. I remember just literally there 4 or 5 times a week, and just went through the motions of church. Thought going to church made me a Christian. It wasn't until I was 17, went through a breakup, went to a music festival, Mad at God. A speaker came on stage and had this joy in Jesus. His name's Nick Vujicic, had no legs, no arms. I was like, I want to be happy like that guy. And so gave my life to Jesus for real at 17. Got baptized and really started to learn what it meant to live a life of following Jesus, not just going to church.
Right. And first of all, I think that growing up in the church actually can be very difficult to try and actually have that encounter with Jesus where it really becomes your own. So the fact that you in that hard space as in a breakup, Jesus totally met you in that space. Sometimes it takes that vulnerability in that place where you're like, I have no other option. I just want to be happy, that God meets us in that space. And to be in high school, do you feel like any of that part of your story has led into your passion to really speak into the lives of high schoolers?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially high schoolers. Our whole goal is to reach students who don't know Jesus, who are far from him, who would never go to church. So how can we create an environment where people farthest away from Jesus would come and encounter the real Jesus? And so, yeah, just thinking through my story, I also know there's those students who grow up in church, who have been spoon-fed the Bible verses, have gone to camp, raised their hand every year, gotten baptized 15 times. I'm like, I resonate with those students too, because they live their faith through their parents' faith.
Right.
They live their faith through, I go to a Christian school, or my parents just grew me up in church, and I've kind of been learning about all this stuff, but it's never connected with my heart.
Right. And so at that point, whenever you have given your life to Christ and you're like, I'm all in, I'm 17, we're going for this.
Yeah.
What do you feel like your passion in life is now? How have you discovered that? And what would you say your passion is that God has gifted you with, not only with your talents and your graces, but also your story, how to be in the community that God's placed you in?
Yeah, well, when I was 17, I didn't have many passions besides music and basketball, too short to make it in the NBA. And at that time, music was like, okay, let's see what God does with this. I played in the worship band. And from there, I knew I wanted to go to a music school. And someone said, hey, go to this school in Australia. I was like, that sounds cool. What is it? They're like, it's this place called Hillsong. Didn't know much about Hillsong and knew that they had a few songs. And 4 days after I graduated high school, I moved to Sydney, Australia, and went to Hillsong College. And that's where people kept saying, you're going to be a pastor. You're going to be a pastor. I was like, nah, I'm here for drums. I'm here to play music. I'm here to figure out my life, treating it like a gap year. And people prophetically were saying, you're going to be a pastor. Specifically, you're going to be a youth pastor, and God is going to use you to change lives. And it reminded me of this time when I was I went to camp. I love camp, and I was in 10th grade, so I didn't really know Jesus. But my friends at that time broke down in tears and said, Matt, God's going to do something with your life that's going to blow your mind. I said, what the heck does that even mean? Then I rewind and I look at that. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's crazy what happened. But yeah, going from Hillsong to people just affirming me as a leader and a pastor and training me up. Eventually moved back, got a college degree, worked at churches, and just got passionate about life change, seeing how God changed my life as somebody who went to church but also went to parties, who didn't have passions in life, didn't know what to do with them. If I did have passions of like music and basketball, didn't know what I could do with it. How God transformed that kid with a 1.9 GPA who almost failed out of high school to where I'm at today, just helping people just grow, just being addicted to life change.
And I want to point out as well the fact that 1.9 GPA, you are currently in school.
Yeah, getting my doctorate right now, when teachers were like, you're never going to go to college. It's not an option for you. You can't get into a school. That God opens up doors that people try and close.
Right. And I love how you're saying too, the fact that you were told multiple times along the way that, oh, God's got, plans for you in this. You're going to be a pastor. You're going to do those things. And you're just saying no.
Yeah.
No. And I like to think of it as, hey, God's got jokes, because without those gradual steps of just saying yes, like you just going there and saying yes because you want to play drums.
Yeah. Yeah. I just went, didn't know what I was doing, didn't know anybody in the country, in the continent, on that side of the world. It was crazy, but I love just being open to new things. And I was like, why not just go to Australia? And now looking back, because that was 11 years ago, seeing what God has done with the yes. And so many times we don't want to say yes because we don't know the plans. But I think God is like, just give me a yes and I'll show you the way. And it was saying yes first, and then he shows the way.
So then how do you help other people find what things to even say yes to, or their passion? Because I know that you not only obviously are you working that we've talked about with high schoolers, but your podcast is awesome and helping people learn these skills from other leaders of how we lean into areas that we lead in. Because I truly believe that we all have leaders, we all have influence, right? And in that, there are people that we are really in some type of leadership over in our lives and some type of influence. So it's a critical conversation to be having, and you help bring that out for people. But I wonder, because you are in that space so often, what are the things that you see are hindering people from saying, one, maybe just saying yes, or two, finding the things to say yes to?
Yeah, I think one of those things is a lot of people are people pleasers. That stops them from saying yes, because they're like, if I say yes to God, am I saying no to my parents? Am I saying no to my family? If I say yes to God, am I saying no to my friends? Am I saying no to these people who are speaking into my life? We have to be careful of who we let speak into our life and use wisdom. I think we see that all through the Bible. We see that all through Scripture. And so many people are shaped by the wrong people in their life. They might be close to you. I've seen it so many times. We did this series for high schoolers called Toxic, about toxic relationships in their life. And usually you think of a bad boyfriend or girlfriend or these friends in your life. The number one thing students were saying was their parents were toxic in their life. That was the number one thing I heard. And it was heartbreaking, because I think so many times parents want to relive their life through their kids. And so I just say use wisdom. Obviously, the Bible is clear to obey your father and mother and to respect them. And so, but at times we often let other people hinder our yes to God because of earthly voices.
Right. And if you're just joining us, we are here with Matt Swifty Perry, and he is talking to us right now. We're talking about how do we find our yes, and what are those things that are hindering us from saying yes to the call maybe that God has in our life and the passion he's placed in us. And people pleasing is one of those things. I mean, personally, I've dealt with that along the way, where I haven't wanted to say yes because in my case, it wasn't normally my parents. It is other people around me. I'm afraid of what everybody else is going to think that I say yes to. Like, why does she think she can say yes to that? Or why does she think God's called her to do that? Which is very interesting, because usually it's like, oh, it's people pleasing, make sure everybody else is fine. But I feel like I've struggled along the way with that fear of what other people are thinking of my yes. And so how would you encourage people to push past that?
Yeah, I think the encouragement is to bring in good voices who are going to counsel you, right? Iron sharpens iron. And so bring in good iron. Too many times people want to bring in wood to try and be sharp, and wood dulls a blade. It doesn't sharpen a blade. And so iron sharpens iron. Bring people in your life who can help you think through things, who can pray over you and help to see the yes that you need to say for what God is putting in front of you. And then run after it. Too many times, I think people run away. We pull a Jonah, and God tells us to do something, and we're like, oh, that's not my plan, God. I'm going to go this direction. And we miss out on what God has for our life because we run the opposite direction. I almost missed out on God's plan for my life because I was like, I'm in college. Girls don't really like a guy who wants to be a pastor, and these parties look really fun. And that seems like a way cooler option than just being labeled as the pastor at 19, 20 years old at college. I was like, that's not what the songs and the media are telling me to do. And there's this tension, and I needed good voices in my head who would call me out and call me back to what God's put in my life. And now I see the thousands of lives that have been impacted by me getting straight on the right path and walking that out the way that God has called me to.
Right. The iron. We need iron in our lives, not wood. That was like, I was over here about to start snapping. That was so good. That was so good. And I can attest to that, the need for community and good community in our lives. It actually changes the trajectory of where we're headed. And that is why I honestly, with even high school pastors, the way that you guys pour into the next generation is so critical, and creating an environment where they feel safe, because they might fear what their parents, like if they said yes to this, but they know that you're for them. And that's so critical. But also the beauty is that God redeems all time. And so if you have been saying, oh, I can't do this, but now you're 64, and you're like, oh, I still feel like I should step out. It's a yes. Step out, start taking those steps forward, and push back those thoughts in your mind of being like, okay, now people are going to think I'm too old. That people pleasing of being like, what are they doing at this age, trying to finally walk out their passion. And so I know that you're doing one-on-one coaching and all of that. What are those things? Because I feel like sometimes our passion, it dictates our identity, actually. And so have you seen those two struggle between like what God's calling us, but we're trying to find our identity in something we're doing instead of who he is calling us to be?
Oh, all the time. Every day I have to fight against that my identity is not a pastor. My identity is not a leadership coach or expert. My that's not who I am. And if God took those things away from me, how would I respond? That's what I have to ask myself. My identity is in Jesus, in what Jesus did on the cross, and who I am as a child of God, not as a pastor or a podcaster or any of these other things that I love that I use to glorify God. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves, if God took all of that away, would I still love God? Would I still be who I am? Would I still have a passion for Jesus? Would I still love Jesus the same? And that's a hard question to ask, because sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes I'm like, no, I would not love God the same if he took everything that I've worked for and I love and my passions away. And then I have to sit down and I have to reevaluate and I have to go back to scripture and I have to pray for my heart. And so many times we're so scared to ask ourselves that question. If God took my wife away, me as a pastor away, my podcast, everything I do online, my social media, if God took all of that away, where would I be? How much would I still love God? And I have to constantly ask myself that question. Am I okay if God calls me to pastor a church of 50? And that's a question so many pastors don't want to answer, because we look at all of our influence. I call it pastor porn, where we compare ourselves to all these other pastors or leaders on social media. I'm like, oh yeah, I just want a church that size, then I'll be happy. But I have to ask myself, I'm like, what if God's asked me to just be a high school pastor forever? That doesn't make me less than a pastor. People always ask me, like, Matt, when are you going to be a real pastor? I 100% am, because high school ministry is not easy, right? That's the hardest generation to pastor. The conversations I have, it's crazy. And so I'm a real pastor, and I have to remind myself of that. So much, I think, of it is just reminding yourself of finding your worth. Where's your worth at?
Right. So do you see, I'm just wondering, okay, and in this generation, this culture that we're living in, people are wanting to find this passion, this call in their life. I even believe that people who don't know Christ, don't know that God made them in his image, are in this search for finding why they were created, that why. And because of that, we're creating all of these sections in society and tribal groups and trying to label ourselves all of these things. And I wonder if that's because your heart is to help people find life change and to find that niche where they're like, this is where I'm going. This is what God has created me to do. And I'm wondering, what can we do in a world that's trying to label all the time? How can we be an example to them who are just trying to find their identity in everything else? What would you say for us as believers is maybe something helpful that we can do, or a way to live to be an example?
Yeah, I think we overcomplicate it. We're like, God, what is your plan for my life? And we're trying to just see if God will drop a magical sign from the sky that says this is your job you're supposed to do, your career, what you're supposed to study in college, who you're supposed to marry. And we just expect God to write that with a plane in the clouds for us so that we can see it, when that's not reality. If you're a Christian, your mission is for people to know Jesus. If you are a Christian, like that is what you are called to do, is to make disciples of all nations. Jesus makes that so clear for us. That's your sign right there. Open it. Matthew 28. But then from there, it's like, how do I make that happen? What avenue do I want to do to make disciples of all nations? Maybe God's gifted you to do beauty. So you're like, I'm going to go into hair and makeup, and I'm going to use that time to talk to clients about Jesus and how he's changed my life. Maybe God's called you to be a barber or a tattoo artist, and you have this incredible time with your clients for hours on hours on hours to share the gospel with them. Maybe God's called you to be a doctor or a nurse in this moment where people feel like they're all by themselves, and they're in this moment of, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live, and God's put you there for that moment. But everything is for Jesus to be known by everybody on the earth so that they can live a life of following him. And now it's really about you choosing the avenue that you feel like you can make that happen.
Right. The contentment, even going back to your other statement, even before, if you're okay with pastoring, are you okay with just pastoring 50? It's being okay in the lane and finding contentment with where God has placed you, and then finding ways to use that community. I mean, I guess that avenue to serve your community. And I would actually confess, I'm confessing here, the fact that even during COVID, it was very interesting because a lot of people who are in ministry leadership got to have this different space and time where they got to write the study they never got to, or write the book, or start the podcast, or do all of those things. And I was sitting there because I am also full-time staff at a smaller church, and it changed the game because all of a sudden you're serving in a very individual, like in one-on-one phone calls, meeting them, all that stuff type of way. And I was sitting there like, okay, if this is all that I do for the rest of my life, am I okay with that? Is God still good? And I think that even can push against us finding our being okay with saying yes in our passions, because it doesn't look as big or as glamorous as everyone else. But when we pull in where he's placed us, and how you were saying, like wherever it might be, but just saying yes to the moment, that is actually what we need to be doing instead of that comparison. Do you find that comparison and maybe even discontentment has led to some people just saying like no to what God has maybe put in front of them because it didn't look like what they were wanting? Yeah,
comparison's the biggest killer in our culture. Comparison kills dreams. It's killed people. Like, I know people who have committed suicide because of comparison, because they're comparing their life, their social media. I'm just never going to be as good as that person. Comparison is such a killer. We have to kill comparison in our life before it kills us.
Wow.
And so many people's dreams and passions have died because they're just comparing every day. All they're doing is sitting and scrolling social media and comparing themselves to other people. And we need to kill comparison in our life. And we need to go back to who Jesus has called you to be. And who cares who God's called other people to be? Encourage them, cheer them on. Stop comparing and start cheering other people on.
That's good. And as we're closing, an encouragement for others, as your passion is to see other people's life change, and you're addicted to having other people meet Jesus in that way.
Yeah.
What's an encouragement that you would love people just to hear as we're closing out our time together?
Yeah, take it one step at a time. You're not going to have that book written tomorrow. You're not going to have that podcast or YouTube channel started by 3:00 today. Just take it one step at a time. Take it one step of finding what that calling and that passion is in your life. And then start taking a step towards making those dreams come true. You can write that book, just write a page at a time. You can create that podcast, create that YouTube channel. Just take it one step at a time. You go at your own pace. Too many people want to go at other people's paces. Mm-hmm. Go at your own pace. Take it one step at a time. And I'll end it with this quote. Bob Goff, who I just pretend is my grandpa, he said, we need to just fall in love with Jesus, love him, and live it out for 5 seconds every single day, every 5 seconds.
Wow.
So just focus on the 5 seconds And then after that, focus on loving Jesus and loving people for 5 more seconds. And do that for 5 seconds, every 5 seconds for the rest of your life.
That is great. So, Matt, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram, on any social media at Matt Swifty Perry. That's just the easiest way to connect.
All right. Thanks, Matt. And just remember, every day is an invitation to live the vibrant life. Thanks. Thank you for joining me on the Vibrant Life Show. I would love to connect with you and get to know you. My favorite place to hang out is over on Instagram at allie.gentry or over on Facebook. You can also go to my website, alliegentry.com. That's ALIGENTRY.com. Sign up for my newsletter to stay up to date and get links to the show on all platforms after we air, the show's YouTube channel, and really just all the things. I'm so honored to get to hang out with you today. My heart is that you remember that each day is an invitation to live the vibrant life.